All right. Well, I've got 6:32. I thought there was one other coming on, but I have not seen that person pop on yet. So let me open this up with a short prayer and we'll get started. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we always are in remembrance of your gift of life and of your willingness to offer yourself as a victim on the hardwood of the cross. So keep us ever mindful of those who, because of the way in which our society, our culture, and our world carries itself, that there are people who find themselves under the oppression systems, under the oppression of people. Grant that we as your church may first listen and be aware of their stories, then give us the courage where you lead us to act, stand firm and advocate and be with those who suffer under the hand of any oppression, that we all may know the redeeming power of your love through Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. So, 5, 6, and 7 are our chapters. If you do not have the book, we'll follow along. There's plenty of conversation material that will still be relevant. One quick public service announcement before we begin. This is for all of y'all here. Here's Gay Marie. I thought I saw her coming in. This is for those who are here tonight, those who will be watching this on YouTube, even though they are not, they mean you on YouTube, are not part of the active discussion here. But I had 3 of you who commented to me last week who all said, did I get a little carried away in my comments? And my first response to that is, no, you didn't. This is something in which is eliciting passion and fervor in you, and that's good. The only reminder I will give when you make comments is just be very careful, one, to speak for yourself and not on behalf of others, to make sure that you're not making comments that are knocking somebody who might be on the other side of an issue. And just be respectful, because we're all here to learn. Some of us have much more exposure to some of these issues than others. Some of us don't, but we're all here to grow and to learn from where we are. And so I want to kind of answer those emails that were said to me in a blanket statement, in addition to what I commented to each of you who asked me individually. Do not be at all unabashed in your passion for speaking on this topic, but also remember that we're all in different places here, and that's the whole point of this, is we're coming to learn and coming to see where God's calling us in how we become aware and active as a parish family in the community when it comes to dealing with issues of racism and injustice and dismantling systems of oppression that are around us. So want to just make that reminder before we get started. Like last week, if you read the chapters, there is a whole lot of material that we can cover. And again, I have 2 or 3 fallback questions for discussion, but I'm going to let y'all start off. Any reflections on any of these chapters, topics, themes, part of the story that Stevenson goes over?
There's a switch to victims' rights. You know, the people, when he goes to visit the 2 cousins of the gal that was killed, and they don't think that they caught the right man, and they're upset that there's not a real investigation going on. And he details how, he details, I feel like I'm always yelling with earphones on, but he details that he feels that the attention to victims' rights is making, is kind of skewing the death penalty and the severity of some of the sentences. And I thought this was kind of taking the thing a little bit from worrying about the guys that are have been picked up and sentenced to death and, didn't get the proper justice, to the victims and the families of the victims. So that's kind of a interesting treatment that the book takes.
And along with that, in his exploration of injustice within the justice system, he had pointed out that the poor and minority victims were not listened to the way that the wealthier victims were. And so these poorer victims, that is, I thought they were twin sisters, aunts of, what's her name, Patty, or who was killed, that they felt they weren't being listened to, just like the family, Walter's family, felt they weren't being listened to. There's kind of a thread in there of discounting witnesses who have valuable information, but they're poor or minority, whether they're victims or whether, well, supposed criminals. Walter was a victim too. So, and then the other theme of that young boy, 14-year-old, who was incarcerated and raped multiple times over 3 days. And, you know, we have a lot going on right now about sex slavery, but I think of some of the kids that are down at the border who've also been abused by ICE. I mean, there seems to be
exactly what I thought of, Gay Marie. Exactly. Taken from their parents and just without protection and vulnerable. You know, absolutely. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's fine.
Yeah.
We are one of the few countries that will really prosecute children as adults. You know, I mean, basically, under certain circumstances, basically hold them responsible as if they were full functioning adults. And in the case of this little boy, though, it was just very heartrending.
Yes.
And you
very.
know it happens. I mean, it's just, so.
As you read this book, you know, you think, oh, well, some of these cases happened a few years ago. I was one that they referred to that happened in the 70s and so forth, even one back in 1944. And you think, okay, well, it must be better now. Well, just today on the news, I heard about a man who was, or maybe I read about it in USA Today, one of the two. But it's a current story about a man who was arrested for stealing some pruning shears. And he was put in prison, and eventually he was given a life sentence. Now, it wasn't just for the pruning shears. He had been arrested 3 or 4 times before. And at one point he had been guilty of a felony, and he had spent 10 years in prison for that. And then he'd done some shoplifting and a couple of other things. But the total amount of stuff that he had stolen was less than $1,000. And the article was pointing out, to keep this guy in prison the rest of his life, and the prison he'd already had, is going to cost us over $1 million. And it occurred to me that $1 million spent on this kid young, when he was younger, or maybe even just a few $100s spent on him when he was younger, maybe getting him some help, getting a big brother, getting him into a program, it would have saved us all $1 million. And we would have a functioning, tax-paying human being. And I got very depressed.
It's always after the fact when we spend the money.
Yeah.
And then you put that in context with some of the things that have happened over the last, it's not recent, but over the last 10 or 15 years, you know, the huge recession that we had, and, you know, the cause of that, and the people that made fortunes off of it and got away scot-free. And you put some poor guy that's stolen less than $1,000 of stuff in prison for life. I mean, it's just, you know, if you're high enough in there really are two systems of justice.
There was a story on the news last night about some inmates. Some of you probably saw it. They saved a guard. He had been out with heart trouble. The guard had, and he had come back to work, and I believe it was late at night, but you know how all the, prison, the wards or whatever you call them, they circle around where the guard sits down at the bottom. And one of the prisoners saw this guy like looking disoriented. So he saw the guard and he automatically started banging on his door, which the guard's the only one that can open a door from his area. And so they all started banging to help this guy out, to get somebody to come. And the guy was disoriented, the guard was, but somehow he managed to open that guy's door. And three of them ran down there and, tried to help him and called 911. And the guy was in cardiac arrest. And so later, he was speaking on the news about this, and he said, from now on, I'm going to listen to everybody. I'm going to be compassionate. So that one instant made him change, and he's not going to be stupid. I mean, of course, but it made him change the whole way he looked. His whole perspective was changed. So that really spoke to me a lot, and we need more of that.
Well, I was just thinking about the total frustration when the writer, Mr. Stevenson, thought he was meeting a new person. This is in Of the Coming of John. And then he finds out that the witness who's come forward and said, there is no way Bill Hooks could have been there. I was working with him all day. And that has come back to the Attorney General or whatever he was of the county. And they've already slammed him in prison, this poor guy, and charged him with perjury. And it's just the utter brutality of this. Just sticking him in jail and charging him with perjury. He's never given a proper testimony in front of a court or anything. But they're charging him and scaring him to death. So you're left to think all outlets were blocked. That's the way it looks at this point. Where is the hope? I mean, they keep on working, but it was a very, very hard situation for this group of guardians of the law, basically, trying to bring some measure of justice.
And you can see why it would make the whole community feel helpless and hopeless. I think of some of what's going on now in relation to like Brianna in Kentucky having been shot. It's kind of like decade after decade having things happen that aren't corrected, and how it affects the whole community, like Walter's community, knowing that Walter was absolutely innocent, and their lives, their testimony, nobody cares about how they're looking at it at all.
That was one of the most striking things about that account, and it's something that, you know, I think a lot of us are aware of, but maybe on a more theoretical level. But the fact that injustice is not injustice to one person, it affects an entire community, and it destroys the fabric of community. And as much as sometimes we like bury our head in the sand and things like that go on, simple fact of the matter is, it is the old axiom. You know, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, among others, have said this. You know, if you're not standing for good, you are, you know, taking a stand for evil, even if you're doing nothing. And this is precisely the reason. Just to see the hopelessness in the African American community because of this whole travesty of a case. Stevenson does a great job of communicating and showing that was one of the things.
Powerlessness.
Sorry?
Powerlessness.
Yeah, powerlessness, exactly.
Awful.
Well, you know, what I thought of was how they did pull together, and I think the African American community at large, because I've been to funerals of kids that I worked with, and I've been invited to birthday parties of women in their 90s, and they really are tightly bonded because of all the oppression that they've been through, you know, their families. I mean, as far back as you can see. And I've just always been drawn to that. Just how tight they are. Now, they're not perfect. I mean, they're like anybody, but I'm attracted to that. I really am. And I have some really good friends still because of that bond. So.
Great. That's wonderful.
I'm sorry. One of the threads that seems to permeate our justice system is poverty. And I was kind of struck at the beginning of these chapters when he went to visit Walter's wife, and he kind of described the condition of the home, the blue window panes, the wood that needed paint, the clutter of things in the yard. And yet the priorities, Minnie replied to him when he was talking about his suit. She said, "There's nothing wrong with your suit or your car." And the priority that kind of struck me was that their priority was on family, love, and food. And, you know, I admit that I've sometimes will pass out in the, like a drive up to Wartburg, you'll see farmhouses with lots of, maybe every car they've owned in the last 30 years with weeds growing up. And I do have a little stereotype that kind of goes through my mind about why don't they clean that up? And I was reminded of that, and their priority was on love and family and food. Really kind of opened my eyes a little bit about that. But this whole idea of poverty and the lack of money to hire a quality defense team in the beginning has kind of started Walter down this road and so forth. So that was one observation I had this week.
The thing that constantly struck me was how the law was getting bent and bent and bent constantly. People were interfering with the next county. The thing, you know, so the people in this county seemed to be able to tell the people in the next county what to do, and things were getting passed around. And rules were being broken right and left. And, but when he points this out to the court, he can make a long list of all the things that were illegally done or not done according to the rules, and they didn't care.
Power. Lack of power.
Well, I hate to say it, but in Roane County, not that long ago, my experience, and I won't use names, but if they don't want to follow a law, whether it be something at work, some work rule, they just say, that's okay, we don't do that around here. So all of these laws and Supreme Court decisions mean nothing to a lot of the people, it seems, in some of these rural areas, because they are the law.
It occurs to me that can we really expect justice in our courts, in our penal systems, if we don't have justice right outside our door, whatever street? If we live on Elm Street or Oak Street or, whatever, Butterfly Street. But it seems to me that if justice is not paramount on the street that I live on, and all of us live on, why would we expect anything different from our court system?
So what do we do, Sherry?
That's a good question, but we got to do something. That's a very good question. I think that's maybe that's the direction we're going in. What do we do?
A lot of people are marching.
I'd be happy to. You want to march? Come on, let's go.
Yeah, if you sit on the steps of the state capitol, it's a felony offense.
Okay, I won't sit there. I'll sit on the sidewalk.
We haven't talked about that.
It's a felony offense to camp out. So then there's the definition, what does camp out mean? But the interesting thing about that new law is who is it that's demonstrating and camping out, but a lot of young Black people. And the law now is if you have a felony, you'll lose your vote for the rest of your life. So this new rule against the protesters is turning into a voter suppression law as well.
Sounds like me and Gay Marie are on. I got to take Gay Marie to keep me straight, so make sure I don't screw up somehow. It sounds like me and Gay Marie are on.
Seems to me all of these things are frustrating. It is not the law, it is not the system, it's the people. In all these cases in Alabama, they were just ignoring the law. It was their basic prejudice that led to most of this action. And that's what's frustrating, because how do you change what's going on now if you don't change the people?
But sometimes the law is part of the problem, like
but that's
felony law in Tennessee that was just passed, or where was it, South Dakota, somewhere, the Indians will now be charged if they want to protest the pipeline. So, part of the issue is the law. So certain people will follow the law when it means they can prosecute somebody, but they won't follow the law if the law is preventing them from prosecuting somebody. So there seems to be a real will to prosecute and incarcerate.
Yeah, that's where we were agreeing. I mean, it is not the laws, it's not the legislature. How do you legislate against the sort of stuff that the judges in Alabama were doing? That's what's so frustrating.
Maybe we need to read the book to the end and find out.
It doesn't have any answers.
No.
I haven't finished.
So if you see the movie has kind of what happened to each of the characters after the end. And I'm not doing any spoilers, not until we get to the end. Basically about who gets reelected and who doesn't get reelected from all that. But it's very sobering.
It's very powerful. The whole thing is power. Who has power? How do they exercise it? Who doesn't have power? I mean, that's what it's about. I'm white. So are
And
we all.
I'm just overwhelmed by how Bryan Stevenson hangs in there
Yeah.
through one setback after another. And we learned something this time in the first chapter, because we were talking last week about his education, and we learned that, like John, he was supported by his community to be sent to school, but not to become a teacher. But when he's talking about the story of John and how there was a lynching, and he's driving back to Montgomery at night and sort of saying, I must not go the same way. I must not do something that would get me lynched. And it's powerful, as you said, that he's up against everything, and yet he's persistent. And I think it must, when he goes with his buddy in to meet with the DA and the sheriff and in the county, and they all say, well, somebody's paying you, where are you getting your money from? And they're sort of needling him constantly.
Yeah. They can't believe in somebody just doing it from the goodness of heart, caring.
Well, we could say, well, we better elect better people, but I've seen us here in Tennessee re-electing people who there is proof that they've done all kinds of bad things.
Yeah.
And if they do things that they say you shouldn't do, and we just re-elect them. I don't, but I didn't vote for them, but some people do. And so that, it gets, you understand that people get somewhat disenchanted with the whole system, because some good old boys get reelected and reelected and reelected, and they're crooked as hell.
Yeah.
Anybody actually read that W.B. Du Bois story that he references in chapter 5? I mean, of John. Have you actually read the story?
No.
Did somebody say they have?
No.
No.
I think John Wilson used it in a sermon one time.
Really?
Because John Wilson was an enormous proponent of W.E. Du Bois.
Mm-hmm.
And I have heard this, I'm pretty sure that he's the person I heard the story from.
Yeah. It's a powerful story, and it's not that long. I mean, it's a little bit of a read, but it's not that long. I would highly recommend it to you. But I mean, he hits the salient points of the story. Essentially, the story is about a man who's kind of becomes the hope of the community, and they send him off to school to learn so he can be the first teacher to come back and teach the African Americans in his little small town, and runs into oppression, and runs into the fact that he's trying to come in and change the rules of the game, and people in power don't want him to change the rules, and they are free themselves to abuse the rules, and that's ironically how he winds up dead, is from being lynched because of calling out the son of I can't remember if it's the mayor or the sheriff or judge or whoever it was, that is doing something inappropriate to his sister. But it is the people who have enacted the kind of change that Sherry was mentioning. Where can we find that kind of justice? Usually the people who wind up on the short end of the stick. I mean, obviously we are part of the faith that worships a man who that you could substitute some of the story of Jesus for that story of the coming of John. People who are modern day prophets, so to speak, or ones that are not necessarily trying to say we have to upend things, but the rules need to be applied to all people, and justice needs to be something that builds up and is not the select item of a few. And I think that's where the rub comes in for the church is we as a church have, it's essentially a crossroads. And this is for us at St. Stephen's, and this is for the church, Big C in general. We can either just kind of be comfortable where we are and do what we're doing, which is in one sense fine, or we can challenge things when we see people who are being oppressed. And I think part of the church's issue over the years has been sometimes the church, it's not that we don't acknowledge it and say it's not there, but we just kind of put our head in the sand and say, we're not willing to absorb that kind of, because with the kind of justice that he's talking about in this book and what Sherry was referencing earlier is a justice that comes with a great cost. I'm a big Bonhoeffer guy. If you've read Bonhoeffer, one of his books is called The Cost of Discipleship. And he speaks of mercy and justice just like Bryan Stevenson's doing. And it comes with a great cost. Bonhoeffer's one who suffered the ultimate cost for that. And I think that's one of the filters I want us to think about as we go through, and not just today's discussion, but as we go forward in later weeks and then beyond. When this book study is done, what does it mean to pursue justice in our community? And what is the cost of that? We need to count the cost of that as we start thinking about what that's going to take for us to truly be people who stand up and proclaim justice as it's meant to be proclaimed. Read that story, The Coming of John. It's a good story.
That it also reminds me of a question I've had in the last few weeks. In a Chinese, Malaysian meditation tradition, they have their version of what I would say like the 10 Commandments. And one of the sayings is to follow the path on earth, cultivate the self according to the laws of humanity and society. So amongst some friends that follow that tradition, I've said, well, so what do you do when the laws of when the laws of society are contradictory to the laws of humanity? And it's like church law versus civic law, the rule of Caesar or the rule of Jesus. I think we find ourselves, or I find myself, trying to figure out how do you deal with that difference when there's so many things going on in society right now that are unjust, and people will say, but it's the law.
What did your Malaysian friends say?
Nobody's answered.
Okay.
I posed a question that left everybody speechless.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, I was struck by what you said, Gay Marie, in terms of humanity. Now, I have told you all before, my family was from Hard Times, Mississippi. Little town called McCool, Mississippi, outside of Kosciuszko in Talent County. Now, McCool, Mississippi has about 74 people right now. I think that's about the average population it's been for the last 50 years. So I'm talking about rural Mississippi. And as a girl growing up, I graduated from high school in 1970. I graduated from university in 1973. So in the late 60s and early 70s, I was taught specifically, you shall not make eye contact with a black man. If a black man gets within 6 feet of you, you need to start hollering, screaming, and yelling. So those are my roots.
Mhm.
I will tell you this story in terms of humanities, where I'm trying to get to, Gay Marie. I am probably a freshman or sophomore at the University of Tennessee, and I'm visiting Mississippi for Christmas break. And one of our dear cousins, who's a teacher in Greenwood, Mississippi, and this is just about the time they're getting ready to integrate in Greenwood, Mississippi. I'm not making this stuff up. This is the truth. I'm not making it up. I'm sitting in this little house in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, and we are having our holiday visit, which is the way it was done down there. Everybody goes and visits. And so we had our little coffees and our little cookies and all that kind of good stuff. And my grandmother, love her heart, had all the refreshments and everything to be gracious, Southern grace, blah, blah, blah. If you've not seen The Help, watch The Help. So this teacher, cousin, begins to say, oh, yes, well, they can put those, and she obviously used the derogatory slurs. I will simply say black children. They can put those black children in my classroom. But everybody knows, here's the good part, everybody knows that those people have thicker craniums. They have thicker skulls. And therefore, there's not enough room for the size brain that we white people have. And so therefore, it is pointless for them to put them into my classroom. You can't teach them anyway. So her strategy was to put those black children in the back of her classroom and ignore them. And that was the beginnings of integration. My bottom line here is, I think, and this is my generation, then I look at my children and my grandchildren and I look and I think, oh yeah, we've made a lot of progress from what I grew up with. But my bottom line is information. Getting good information. I've told my kids they're going to tattoo it on me before they bury me, I think, which is, good information leads to good decisions. And I think one of the problems throughout history is the dissemination of bad information.
Oh, yes.
So, we do have an opportunity. It doesn't, I don't have to, I'd be more than happy to go to the Nashville or wherever. I'll do whatever. But the idea is that, we can all disseminate good information. We can all champion good information. That's all.
Amen.
Thanks, Sherry.
I'd like to play devil's advocate a little bit, because good information is defined in different ways by different people.
Yes.
Always going to have that clash of
Yeah.
who do you believe, and it's hard. Just like the question that Gay Marie raised, it comes sort of back to the same thing. Perspective or an opinion, or it's a personal choice.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And, my definition, from my personal definition, is, of course, fact-based, science-based,
Sure.
I'm going to go back that way. But I do think, and, whether it's COVID or whether it's racism, the challenge is battling bad information.
Yeah. I'm there with you, but there's always, I agree with you. But there's people that, what we think is good information, they're going to think it's bad information.
I've got them right on the street where I live. Yeah. I agree. I understand. What
the whole brouhaha over masks. I mean, this is so simple. It prevents infection. But for people, we're tromping on personal rights.
Yeah, and problem with information has become politicized, and at the government level, you have two parties that offer two different sets of information, and and oftentimes neither one is actually true. It's the truth is somewhere in the middle, and the public gets confused searching for the right information. And part of my motivation for these discussions here is oftentimes when I get information and I want to learn about things like this, that we're talking about injustice and issues of racism and whatnot, have a community that you trust where you can get information. That's one of the best ways to get good information. I'm 100% with Sherry on that. But part of it is the source of that information, and the context of where we prosecute is very, very important. Because otherwise we're just going to politicize it and dismiss information that disagrees with our viewpoint as, oh, that's just some
Well, I'm with her.
talking head point on the other side of where I stand.
I do like science-backed information. A lot of people don't. This is Oak Ridge, so a lot of us are this way. And so I think we find it very confusing when people can deny science. No, there's no climate warming. No, we don't need masks. No, we don't need to do this. We don't need to do that. And it goes on. Here we sit, science-based, and you can listen to people, and you can try to listen, and listening, because I believe listening is the heart of change. It gives them a sense of being heard. And I mean, really listening. But, those that have ears to hear and those that don't, I think that's where we are now.
On a theological level, though, if you look across denominations, you get some of those same disparities, if you will, or differences, because some people process things on an emotional level. Others, and I'm going to say us because I'm including me, think on the logical level. But you see that just in theological terms. Are we going to trust science or are we going to trust feelings? So I think we see some of those theological differences playing into how we deal with society.
Well, there's also, I think we're talking about two different things here in a way. I mean, yes, you can take a subject and people can disagree. I like Israel, I don't like Israel's policies, that kind of thing. But to say that somebody's cranium is thick and the brain is smaller is a factual thing. And you've got to deal with that in a completely different way. And it's kind of hard, except to saying to the guy, hey, you're dumber than a dodo. That's not true. Or maybe you could say it in a nice way. But so we need education badly. We need to be raising people who know how to think, who know how to look up things. I mean, my gosh, it'd be very easy to go to your computer right now and say, how thick is a cranium in Chinese, Caucasian, and Black people, and see if there's any difference. There might be. I don't know. I've never looked it up. I suspect there isn't. But so you've got to deal with people who are actually telling you things that are not true, that cannot be proved. Thank heavens we've got fact checkers these days. And I put something on the other day that I got from somebody else, and Amazon told me that it was only partially true. And I was thrilled that somebody told me that what I had passed on wasn't completely true.
That's great.
They should do it more. I had read today that they did take a whole lot of stuff offline today.
I think it's a lot easier to believe derogatory stereotypes about other people when you have had no personal contact with them or very minimal. about 28 years ago, we, for 2 years, hosted a Protestant girl as part of the Ulster Project. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with that. It was a summer program. It brought kids from Northern Ireland together, Catholic and Protestant, each staying in a home of their own native religion, but gave them the opportunity to meet each other face to face on kind of neutral turf, which they could never have in Northern Ireland at that time. It was a time of you know, as you know, great unrest. And some amazing things happened for the kids at that time. But I suspect one of the issues, I'd be curious, Sherry, about the woman who had some pretty bizarre ideas about African Americans, how much personal contact she'd had, how many conversations she'd had with Black people. I didn't grow up in the rural South. I grew up in suburban New Jersey, and there was still plenty of segregation there. And I imagine in rural areas, much the same. But I think that's one of the real challenges, is just having face-to-face experience with people that are different from us and discovering, oh, they're not all that different after all.
Yeah, talking about the troubles in Northern Ireland. I shared an apartment in graduate school with a girl from Northern Ireland. You were talking about a college graduate, and we're in graduate school. And she got very sick, and we had to call the ambulance, and it turned out to be peritonitis, and she was sort of lying on the floor screaming. And when the ambulance came to take her away, the only thing she could say to me was, "Don't let them give me any Catholic blood."
Any what?
Any Catholic blood.
Oh.
That's, you know, when I came face to face with the reality of the troubles, the North and the South, because I could not believe that a highly educated person thought there were different kinds of blood. No. And I think that's sort of what we're saying, is that it's the cultural experience. If you don't have conversations, don't talk.
We're still pretty segregated here.
Yeah.
I think there, I've studied, or my academic background is with, some of it is with social psychology, and they've studied authoritarian and non-authoritarian personalities. And there are certain generalizations that people who have studied this have made. And one of them is that people, some people tend to get their value systems or wind up with value systems from authority figures. And some of them through different reasoning steps where they change it. And, but I would be willing to say that everyone here has changed in their approach to minorities and to Southerners and to Northerners and to whatever it is through the course of their life. And you've had a progress or a change. And the difference is that you are basically able to reappraise where you are and what's going on as a thing that's good for you and your spiritual growth and your self, your self-esteem. And some people just somehow get so rigged or regimented in with what their pastor tells them. Like some pastors will tell them they're going to hell, if they have Catholic blood. And some will tell them, if you vote for a Democrat, we're all baby killers, blah, 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 etc. And then so forth. And they believe this without going through a reasoning, a whole system of reasoning and change. And that's a lot of what we face with people that basically, you know, their daddy did it that way, their grandma did it that way, their big brother told them this. So that's one of the differences in things that you face. And I admit that I was brought up by an Appalachian East Tennessee family, and there was a great dislike of a lot of people, and still is in my family with some people that are quote unquote Northerners, implants, visitor, you know, people that come in and then want to tell everybody what to do. And there's a lot of resentment toward people that somehow feel they've got all the solutions that don't really have to live here or deal with the same things. But now I really, all through the evolution of my existence and being in Oak Ridger and in Knoxvillian and so forth, I've really had to change a lot of my perspectives. And I can do this. And I'm glad I did this, but some people it is not really going to be in their life where they're able to reevaluate and change. I don't know what else to say. Anyway, that's
On
that.
Saturday, I had a 2-hour Zoom meeting with Franciscans. They're over in most of them in North Carolina. And we were talking on a very similar topic. And the question that was thrown out was, when did you, can you point to an event in your life where suddenly you changed your thinking? And mine, you'll get a kick out of this one, Sherry. Mine was, I explained to them, and I grew up in an all-white neighborhood and all-white college, and you know, I really didn't know very many Black people except people that served us in various ways. And I didn't dislike any of them. They were all people I loved. Our maid Domer that we had for years and years and years. She was like a second mother. But when I came down here, I hadn't been here very long, and some of you may remember this incident and can correct me with the details, but we were integrating parts of Oak Ridge, and they wanted to integrate the laundromat, which I think was in Jefferson Circle. Who remembers this? One of you got to remember. Joe, do you remember this? Anyway, there was this laundromat and they wanted to integrate it. And so the Ku Klux Klan announced that they were going to come and wash their sheets and their outfits at that laundromat and keep the Black people out. So Dr. Pollard said, okay, we're going to march. And as I remember it, and I'm going to have to find somebody who remembers this, the details. We marched from St. Stephen's and Dr. Pollard in full regalia, and we went over and we kept the Ku Klux Klan from coming in the laundromat. To me, that was, when I saw the Ku Klux Klan people with their sheets, I thought, oh, there really are Ku Klux Klan people. This isn't just something that I read in a book that happened a long time ago or was in a movie that I saw. There are these real people and they live in my town.
Okay.
That was a moment of awakening.
That's the first verification I've ever heard of that, because I was in the laundromat with my sister when that happened.
Oh, really?
And there was a man that came in there and took there's a Black woman in there who was washing her laundry. He took her laundry out of the washing machine and dumped it in the floor. Mm-hmm. The man who owned the laundromat was a Roman Catholic and his son went to our school. And this was somewhat scandalous for me because I knew that, but here was nonetheless someone who considered himself Roman Catholic who had been involved. I don't completely understand that, doesn't make any sense, but that was the guy that owned the laundromat. And me and my sister were in there. We were panicked. I think my mother had just had another baby or so forth, and that's why we were sent to do that. My sister sent me to Hoskins drugstore with some of the laundry money to keep me safe because she was afraid of what would happen. And she stayed there to guard our laundry, which I still think is.
Can you remember what year that was?
I don't remember.
You're going to have to find that.
Yes.
The story.
But there was,
don't you remember that?
The Klan people were there. And I was like, you know, just as, I mean, we were just.
The problem is I've been here longer than anybody else. So that's, you know.
But I must have been, me and my sister must have been maybe 9 and 11 or so.
Claire, you remember this?
I've never been able to find any newspaper coverage or mention of this anywhere. And that's why I kept thinking, God, I just had a weird dream or something.
No.
Anyway.
Can I give just a tip to people that I learned last week? If you are muted, all you have to do is hit your space bar. It's very.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's always. I didn't mean to get.
So, Joe, you don't remember that?
Remember that?
I'm too old to remember that far back.
Yeah.
Was it the same year that they closed the ice rink because they refused to integrate?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There was a roller skating rink there at Jefferson that refused,
later.
would not go out, and they closed it.
Yeah.
Was it skating rink?
What year that was?
Yeah, well, I think most of the time you hear of the Oak Ridge integrated peacefully, but there's some other little stories that could be told.
There was a barber shop too.
Yeah, there were several incidences.
Tell you what, come up, save some of these stories for next time. So we are at 7:30. As much as I want to hear these,
I will do some research.
Yeah,
I will call
would.
my friend Connie, who their family owned the Oak Ridger, and she'll remember, or she can look it up for me maybe.
And Judy, if you can find
Is it
any
close?
documentation, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, please. I want to hear more about this and the story about the barber shop that y'all were about to bring up. But let's start with that next time. It's interesting that y'all end with this story about the laundromat because I was having a conversation with two different people, Judith Delaney being one, and a friend of mine from another diocese being the other. Some of y'all may have heard of this, and I'm not saying it's something St. Stephen's would do, but it's a potential action item for how we can get in the community and just interact with folks that we normally wouldn't see. Look it up online because this is a ministry a lot of other churches have done. It's called Laundry Love. Anybody ever heard of that? There's a guy that I know named Jimmy Bartz who was out, and Mary's heard of it, which doesn't surprise me, who started this a few years ago. But basically what happens is you take a few people from the church and they rent out the laundromat. When I mean rent it out, they basically say anybody who comes in, we pay for their laundry. We just kind of hang out. We help them and we talk to them. And it's not, hey, we're inviting you to church. Here's a pledge card, that kind of stuff.
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah.
But no, it's not one of those things. So don't get any stewardship ideas from it. It's really just a thing for people in the church to just go out. And I mean, most of us, if I had to guess, probably have our own washer and dryer, access to one. A laundromat is a very different community, I think, for most of us in the Episcopal Church, and it's just really interesting. And just look that up on your own, Laundry Love. But if you want to talk about getting out and meeting some people that would be outside of our bubble and interacting and listening to their stories, that's just something that comes to mind. And as I said, having that conversation today with two other people, and then you all bringing up the story of the laundromat here in Oak Ridge from KKK days. Is just a very interesting parallel. So with that being said, thank you. Some good discussion tonight. Thank you all for sharing a lot of good stories tonight and reflections on the book. So our homework for next time is, today was 5, 6, and 7. So let us cover 8, 9, and 10 next time will be our homework, chapters 8, 9, and 10. And again, if you have any thoughts, comments about anything, shoot them on to me. But I enjoy this every week. Thank you all for being here. And I mean it. Let's lead off with the continuation of those stories you all brought up next time. So we look forward to that.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear.
Thank
all right.
you.
Good night, everyone.
For your memory.
Good to see everybody.
Good to
Connie,
see you.
did you have a birthday this week?
Oh, yeah. How'd you know?
Belated happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Happy birthday, Connie.
Yeah, I'm 46 now. 46.
Oh, my God.
I switched the numbers.
A baby, Connie.
No, I'm not 46. You know
Yeah,
that.
you're a
I'm
young whippersnapper.
64. And you know what? I've never been so grateful and blessed in all my life. This birthday, it just blew me away. And I didn't do much. I mean, but I'm very grateful. I really am. Grateful for you guys too.
Praise the Lord.
We're glad.
Glad to have you.
Yeah, take care.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye,
Good night,
You
Kevin.
have a
everyone.
great
Have a
week.
blessed week.
Thank you, Father
Bye.
Bear.
Love you all.
Love you all.